rather be the villain of the piece? I read somewhere that you...
Oh, yes. No, in terms of getting a part to get your teeth into, the villain is the best. So they're wonderful. They got the good lines. The only thing is they have to die at the end.
Maybe it's because James Bond is such an iconic cinematic hero, but I always have something of a fascination when a 007 actor appears in a film as a villain. Oftentimes they seem to really relish the parts, and yeah, I guess when you're the ultimate screen hero, it must be a breath of fresh air to chew up the scenery as a dastardly antagonist. One of my favourite examples being Timothy Dalton as Simon Skinner in Hot Fuzz, a film that I gave my opinion on a little while ago, and I consider Dalton to be something of a highlight of that very wonderful film. I've seen it many times, so I was very happy to have an excuse to see him in another villainous role when Patreon supporters voted in favour of me making a video about The Rocketeer, a film that I'd never seen before, but hey, an early 90s Timothy Dalton as a baddie? Sign me up! Good evening, Art Deco superhero fans. The Rocketeer released in 1991, which coincidentally would have been when the third Timothy Dalton Bond movie would presumably have been released had it been made, so I guess this film is kind of like our consolation prize for not getting that movie. This is a James Bond-focused YouTube channel. Obviously, Timothy Dalton's presence here is of big interest to me, and I'll get to talking about his role in just a little bit. But I just want to start off by laying out my The Rocketeer credentials, so to speak. I always like to give some context whenever I'm talking about films on this channel about my own relationship with that film, like how much I knew about it when I first saw it, you know, those kinds of things. When it comes to The Rocketeer, aside from knowing it was about a man with a jetpack and Timothy Dalton played a villain, I knew nothing about this film. So for those equally as uninitiated as me, The Rocketeer is a superhero film set in Los Angeles in the late 1930s. It centers around Billy Campbell's Cliff, a stunt pilot who in the opening sequence of the film becomes entangled with a bunch of mobsters who have stolen some secret jetpack technology from Howard Hughes, no less. Cliff and his mechanic Peavy, played by Alan Arkin, are fascinated by the new tech, and it comes in handy when saving the life of a friend whose plane has gone haywire, but this appearance brings about a lot of attention, namely from the FBI, who are keen to return the stolen hardware, and a bunch of mobsters working for the dashing, evil Errol Flynn-type actor Neville Sinclair, played by Timothy Dalton, who has his own nefarious motives behind wanting to acquire the tech. There are further complications when Cliff's relationship with aspiring actress girlfriend Jenny, played by Jennifer Connelly, hits the rocks, especially as she has a big part in Sinclair's latest film, and he goes on a charm offensive to try and get to the bottom of who the man in possession of his stolen goods really is. The story is relatively pedestrian stuff. It's a very typical old-fashioned superhero origin story, but I must say that I did think it was very well told. Joe Johnston is the director. He's probably best known for directing Captain America: The First Avenger. He also directed Jumanji and Jurassic Park 3, and I think of him as being a bit of a student of Steven Spielberg. I often think that his films try to capture some of that Spielberg spirit, and The Rocketeer is no exception. It felt like Spielberg light to me. And I'm not saying that as a bad thing. Like I say, I think that the story is well told, and I love the whole look and style of the film. I really like movies about movies, so the fact that this is set in Hollywood and the villain is a big classic movie star type really worked for me. There are a bunch of classic movie references that I appreciated, but it never overwhelms the film. It never feels too wink wink nudge nudge, which is nice. One of the more niche elements of the film that I got something out of though was, so Sinclair has this henchman, and first of all I love the Bond villain vibes of this, that Timothy Dalton has his own impossibly strong henchman character, and this guy is played by Tiny Ron Taylor, who was a former basketball player, and he's 7 foot tall, so he's very imposing. But they give him this makeup, and at first I was like, is that supposed to be Rondo Hatton? And indeed, I looked it up afterwards, and yeah, makeup artist Rick Baker designed the prosthetic makeup after this relatively obscure 1940s horror actor. I just find it a bit of an odd choice, really, and to be perfectly honest, had I not recently acquired a Rondo Hatton film on Blu-ray, this reference would probably have gone straight over my head. It's just an oddly specific choice, and the makeup is quite, I mean, it's quite obviously a mask, and I don't mind that in a film like this necessarily, and I know that Rondo Hatton had unusual features, but equally I would have just, like, why have you gone to the effort of doing this as a makeup job? Couldn't you just cast someone who has similar features? I mean, I guess that maybe they make it a bit more exaggerated than what they could ever find in real life, but whatever, you know, I did really like this character nonetheless. He is a fun henchman. And indeed, I really loved Dalton as the main villain too. It's funny because I don't know if his performance here is all that different to what he does as James Bond typically, but I found it amusing that he doesn't need to recalibrate all that much to work as this dashing, charming, but very schmoozy actor type. He's just so much fun to watch in this part, and I think he does a good deal of subtle scene chewing throughout. I don't think anyone in the film goes outrageously big with their performance, and that's quite possibly to the detriment of the film, but I'll get there soon enough. But for whatever faults I might feel that the film has, Dalton is not one of them. I love him in this film. I also really enjoyed Alan Arkin. He has something of a parental role, but he's fun at playing the crackpot type of character, and he does some good camera mugging in a few places. I thought he played his part very well. He's good comedic relief. Sadly, I cannot extend this same positivity towards the film's two leads. Jennifer Connelly I've seen in many other films, and I do typically quite like her. Campbell I don't think I've ever seen in anything before, but I found both of them here to be just a little too earnest and sincere in their performances, and given the relatively conventional throwback nature of the Rocketeer, I could really have done with some more charisma and fun in these lead performances. And I don't know if that's a criticism of the actors or if it's of the director, you know, how they were directed, but when I think of fun, swashbuckling leads in adventure films, I think of Brendan Fraser in The Mummy, Johnny Depp in Pirates of the Caribbean, and obviously the deity level, Harrison Ford in Indiana Jones. And because the Rocketeer is clearly going for that same like retro serial adventure feel, that enigmatic lead hero character is quite desperately missing from the film. The film is clearly going for some of that same Indiana Jones adventure serial vibe, but for me it just needed to have a little bit more of a knowing take from the lead character to feel like a modern interpretation of that. Now, I'm not saying that I need him winking at the camera every 5 minutes, but he's so gee whiz all American Pie sincere, and I just don't find that all that compelling in this film. And obviously I'm speaking from the perspective of a 33-year-old who has come to watch this film for the first time, and I know that this thing was made for a family audience, and you know what, if I'd probably have seen this film when I was 7 or 8 years old, I think I would probably have loved it. All the jetpack stuff is very cool, and I think that Cliff is enough of a cipher of a hero that as a kid you can probably really project yourself onto him and think about, oh, how cool would it be if it was me, you know, on the screen flying around like that. Unfortunately, I'm now a jaded and cynical adult, so I just can't connect with a hero character as sincere as Cliff is in this film. I just kind of assumed this was something inherent to the source material that they were trying to replicate, so I was like, well, okay, I guess in the 1940s or from wherever this originated, the character would have been like that. So I was stunned to see that the source material for this is a comic book that started publishing in 1982. I genuinely thought the Rocketeer might well have been a Flash Gordon type movie serial that was being revived here in the 1990s, but no, it's a much more modern invention than I would have given it credit for. By all accounts, from what I read online, the development and production of the film was difficult and a very typical kind of interfering Hollywood executive kind of thing, so I think credit to the filmmakers for producing something as coherent and fun as they did, and I think that it's a shame that the film, well, it obviously underperformed when it was first released, and it feels like they created a world here that was so rich for more interesting stories and villains for the Rocketeer to face, and I do think it's a shame that we never got to see more. Just to talk about the Rocketeer himself as a hero figure, because this is a superhero film, I would say, and I think it's interesting to talk about superheroes, the persona, as separate from the everyday persona, in this case, Cliff. And, well, in the Rocketeer's case, I really love Art Deco and I really love steampunk, so I do really love how this superhero looks. Some of the posters for the film are so awesome and he looks so cool. I'm disappointed that this hero didn't take off more in film because he just looks so unique and different when compared with other superheroes. I kind of wish we spent more time with him, like maybe, you know, fighting some petty crime or something, putting his jetpack powers to good use, as well as just to get more of a sense of what having this new dual identity means to Cliff. I don't know if there's much difference really between Cliff and the Rocketeer, like there is, you know, there's a difference between Bruce Wayne and Batman with Clark Kent and Superman, and a part of the fun of superhero movies like this is, I think, looking at what that duality means to a single individual. What does embodying a secret identity mean for that person? How do they feel like a part of them can be represented through that alternate ego that they can't express in in their everyday persona. There's a certain delight and or darkness, depending on how you play it, in thinking that you can be a different person entirely by assuming a masked persona. The Rocketeer doesn't seem very interested in examining those ideas. Maybe that would come in a sequel. The helmet and secret identity are kind of a practicality thing for Cliff, and that's kind of it, really. Perhaps it's too grey a subject for a film like this to examine, but considering it was coming off of the back of Tim Burton's Batman, which I think did have some prominent themes regarding dual identities, I'm surprised that this film never even seems to consider going near them, but maybe they felt it a bit too mature for the audience that they were targeting. I had a great time with The Rocketeer, and I must say it really did win me around. And for me personally, that's saying something. Once I realized that I was watching a superhero origin story, I was ready to roll my eyes. I feel like I've been so inundated with superhero films these last few years, I never need to see another superhero origin story for as long as I live. So many of them just have so many of the same beats, and I'm finding it all very familiar and overdone at this point. And yet, I did find myself having an awful lot of fun with this film. And I guess given how much this preceded the Hollywood superhero boom, maybe it could indeed be considered a trailblazer. I love the period setting, the action sequences are great, and you know what, I really do like this era of special effects. Just before CGI was about to really explode on the scene in a big way, they're still using matte paintings and stop motion effects and stuff like that, and yeah, okay, you know what, it might not be the height of realism, but I think there's a real charm to it, and I have to say that some of the explosions towards the end of the film were just like jaw-droppingly good. I thought the whole climax was really exciting and a highlight of the film, but good lord, some of these are some of the best explosions that I've seen in a movie ever. Love it. Overall, I found the film to be somewhat refreshing viewing. It's very different. It's a nice, tight, compact little action-adventure film with its heart and impulses in the right place, and I think it has an identity of its own despite some of the more conventional beats that the story follows. I think if it had a more enigmatic, less stilted lead performance, it would be considered a minor classic, and as it stands, I'd still file it under, very good, and of course I'd consider it a must for Dalton fans. Let me know your thoughts on The Rocketeer in the comments section below, especially if it was indeed a childhood favourite of yours. Like I said, I can imagine myself as, 7 or 8 years old really loving the film, and, maybe if I had, maybe I'd have had a lot of fond nostalgia for it as an adult. I'm curious to hear if there are any people out there that fit that description. Also, below you can click the subscribe button and the Mrs. Bell notification button to stay up to date on future video uploads, and you can follow me on a variety of social media pages, including my Patreon page, where you can, if you support me on there, you can vote on what future non-Bond movies I cover on this channel. So with all that being said, and until next time, Art Deco superhero fans, so long for now.